We said, how much money do we need to have in order to walk away, live the life we want to have, and be very happy?
There's plenty of founders who have business worth $5 million, but I've got like $40,000 in savings.
The concentration is there to help you like accelerate the growth rate of your money. The diversification is like a parachute. The only thing you have to worry about right now is not messing it up.
Happy Thursday morning, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is David McKeegan. He has bought and sold multiple companies with his business partner and life partner, Carrie McKeegan. He recently came on the podcast to share how they exited their business for life-changing money, a very large sum. But today, what we want to do is an episode around 5 concepts that we'll call slightly more advanced personal finance for entrepreneurs. We talk about how to determine your FU or retirement money number and some common methodologies for working to that number and managing concentration and diversification on your way there. Like, for example, how much wealth should you have in your primary business versus alternative investments? And also, Dave will share the details of what an 8-figure portfolio construction actually looks like with the details of the holdings. All that and more in today's conversation with Dave McKeegan. Let's roll it. At the top here, I wanted to shout out our sponsor, Bento. So many TMBA listeners are using Bento because it's a solid, no BS email and automation platform built for how founders are actually running businesses in the AI era. If you're already sending real volume of email and want something simpler and more effective, check them out at bentonow.com/TMBA. David, could you introduce yourself and let us know what it is you do?
Hey, Dan, Dave McKeegan, entrepreneur, dad of 3 boys. Not sure what else to say. We travel an awful lot, so yeah, I could add that to the list as well.
Financial sensei in my life, Mr. Miyagi of money. You came on the show to talk about a career-defining exit. Over the years, you've talked to me about your banking career, your sophisticated look at both personal finance and investing. And what I wanted to do today is talk about 5 advanced personal finance tactics for those of you looking to achieve a number of invested money. That would mean you don't have to work another day in your life, or you can work on whatever the heck you want to work on. But I thought we could start off with some basics. So for those of you listening along at home that are like, man, I'm not even ready for advanced, what is a framework that we can follow to get to the point where we can start to think about some of the advanced stuff we're going to talk about today?
Got to walk before you can run.
There you go. Okay, I wrote down personal finance is to business what health is to life. You can have a great business, but if you are not thoughtful about your personal finance, you can easily end up broke. So what I want to do is share with you like my basic personal finance stack to get to the point where we can think about advanced. We're going to get to those 5 points in a bit and get your feedback on some of them. So the first is that I think an appropriate cadence for thinking about personal finance is monthly. So if you're just going to start, it could take you a few days to get these things together, but then it can be a few hours a month you can get this done. And for me, what I'm doing is I'm sitting down with the stakeholders. So if you have a spouse, you're sitting down with them and we're looking at our budget. Use Rocket Money for budgeting. Say, I'm going to spend $1,600 on groceries this month. And throughout the month, you can check in on Rocket Money and see how close to going over that budget item is. That's going to end up being very important. We're also going to look at our balance sheet, which is our total net worth statement. So every single account, logging in, making sure everything's cool, writing down the numbers, the month over month change. This account went here, this account went here. Here's a big one. Now that we have AI, it's easier and easier to create these personal tools, a cash flow projection for your personal business. So basically, we're looking at what is our cash standing going to be 6 months and 12 months out. And then finally, a to-do list. So we don't want to be overwhelmed on a weekly basis about this stuff, but it's like, hey, here's my to-do list for the next monthly meeting. We want to consolidate accounts. and we want to make a decision as to what the next investment we're going to make is with this extra amount of cash we're sitting on. So that's my basic kind of bare bones setup. Any additions to that you would do?
I would say it depends a little bit on where you are in the whole process. If you're somebody that is not used to doing this whatsoever, you might want to check in on this weekly just so that you don't run out of grocery money in the fourth week of the month kind of thing.
Mhm.
You just want to make sure you're following along. The one thing I would add to what you have on this, and maybe this falls on the to-do list, but it's any big purchases that you know you have coming down the pipeline, even if it's not in the next month. So if you know that 6 months from now, your car lease is up and you're going to want to buy that car off the lease, I would put that in there just so that it's on your radar. You know you need to have cash ready for that at some point, and it's where you know it's coming, so you don't get surprised.
Cool. Next, we're going to start with Dave's 5 here. So the first one I wrote down, and again, advanced personal finance tips. Determine your refrigerator number. Okay, a refrigerator number is literally a total net worth figure that you write down on a Post-it note, or you frame it and you magnetize it to your refrigerator. And this is the FU money or enough number or the freedom line at which you can shelve financial questions for a lifetime. So I'm putting out all those different terms out there to see what is most important to you about the refrigerator number. What's I think particularly interesting about your concept is that you did indeed have one and you did indeed get there. And so I'm wondering now in retrospect, if you think about it differently, and how might you advise the rest of us who haven't yet shelved financial questions for a lifetime?
So I'm walking my son over to rock climbing this morning, and he says, "Do you have like Google Maps in your head? Like, how do you know which way we're going?" And I say, "I don't know the exact route I'm going to take, but I know enough of the landmarks to be able to get myself there." And I think something like this is very similar, where if you don't know where you're going, like if you don't know what the end result should be, then how do you know how to get there? Like, how do you know what decisions to make, which turns to make? So, what we did, and again, this is going back a long time, is we said, how much money do we need to have in order to walk away, live the life we want to have, and be very happy? We wrote that down and eventually we got there. And that's wonderful. And I think that's something that can happen uniquely for entrepreneurs because you do control a lot more of what you're doing. A lot of people don't know how to do this. And a lot of people think, well, what happens if it changes over time? It will and it should, right? Because if you're a 22-year-old kid, no wife, no kids, none of that, your idea of what the future holds is going to be very different than if you're a 40-year-old guy with two kids and two college tuitions that you're going to have to pay for at some point in the future and all these other things, right? I think there's different ways to come up with this number. Yeah, society likes to make rules of thumb. They like to try and make finance stuff seem a lot more digestible for people. And I think it also depends on which number you're trying to come up with. So you have your I can quit this job number, and that's probably having a 6 month security, like reserve in your bank account. You have FU money, which is, hey, I could take a year or two off if I want to. And then you have like, I can retire at a specific number. Like, this is my minimum viable retirement number. And then you can have, this is my optimal retirement number. So even within the refrigerator number, as you get more advanced, you're going to have different numbers for different things.
A number I hear a lot that I think makes sense is like 2 to 3 mil in liquid investments in a paid off house. That's an interesting starting point for a lot of entrepreneurs because, and we'll talk about the 4% rule in a minute, but you can kind of like, if your housing costs are your biggest costs, you have that basically reduced to simply the basic carrying costs and not a mortgage or a rent, then 2 to 3 million like would be pretty comfortable for most people in terms of a withdrawal rate, especially for entrepreneurs who won't be able to help themselves from continuing to consult or work or start side projects. You wrote down one here that is a common one that I hear, take your spending and just multiply it by 25. I heard Ricardo Semler multiplied it by 20. That seems to be one that we hear about a lot.
Yeah,
you guys
that's
actually
like
do
the 4% rule.
that's the 4% rule, like basically projected versus done backwards.
Yep.
You have some advanced tactics here, though. I'm wondering if you could share, if you wanted to really nerd out on this stuff, how might you be more sophisticated about your refrigerator number?
Sure. So what we did is we started tracking our spending. How much are we spending on going out to eat? How much are we spending on the kids' school fees? How much are we spending in all these different baskets that we're spending on? And then we said, okay, well, if this is what we're spending now, how much are we going to start spending in the future? How far out can we legitimately project this? And some of the things that are going to change are going to be, school fees. And so then you can start projecting out how much your expenses are going to be. And you can actually model all those cash flows out, I would say reasonably accurately if you put some work into it.
And I've seen the spreadsheets, and it's wild. It's like a nerd's delight or terrifying, depending on where you're coming from. But this is like banker stuff. It reminds me of like what a PE firm would do if they came into your life and they're like, look, you're going to retire and we are going to try and represent your financial life on a spreadsheet. And then we're going to come up with a refrigerator number that's ambitious based on these future cash flows that are required.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can use just some general rules of thumb that people use, for inflation rates, for market returns, for diversified portfolio, things like that. For me, I think it really helps visualize what can happen, like what your future is going to look like if you make some good decisions in the present.
Personal anecdote. I wish I would have done this because at a certain point in my career, I just had like enough money for myself. And so I didn't think too much about personal finance because I was like, I really can't, I'm fine. But I didn't think about the future that much and that my expenses would indeed go up or my money requirements would change as I pursued different parts of life. A lot of our listeners right now could be like affordable apartment and a laptop with 4 monitors. And like, I'm super excited. And that is a cool, like we're in build mode. But if the PE firm comes in and they're called Refrigerator Inc. and they're trying to get you a number that will be durable for 50 years, what would they say about, what your desk is going to look like in 10 or 15 or 20 years? And you mentioned things like that, like a college education. And I think that's where some of the old school finance gurus get it right. Part of Dave Ramsey's baby steps, you're not out of the baby steps until you set up a college savings fund. And I think there's a lot of wisdom to that.
And there's also a lot of value in just thinking and planning, years, decades ahead. Obviously, all these things can change, but if you make good decisions and you make a plan, it's a lot easier to change things in the future than it is to scramble at the last minute trying to figure something out.
Agreed with that. And even now, as we're on the precipice of maybe unprecedented change, I think it's worth reminding myself that I've always thought that. I thought that shit's going to be so crazy, that any plan I make will be destroyed. And the value of the planning is durable and valuable regardless of the amount of change that we see. Because the reality is that few important things change, but most things stay the same. And so it is worth planning based on what you currently know. Speaking of which, there is a very durable and popular rule, which is going to be our number 2 advanced personal finance topic, which is why the 4% rule is slightly more powerful than people think. My understanding of the 4% rule is this, and then I want you to push it a little bit further if you can. You can essentially take your liquid investments, your stock portfolio essentially, and you can live off of reliably 4% of that portfolio without affecting the principal, or it's not indefinite, is it? Like there's like a time frame, like 30 years.
Yeah, the original Trinity study where they modeled this out effectively said that, yeah, you had, I forget what it was, like a 90 or 95% likelihood of success with a diversified portfolio of stocks and bonds if you only took out 4% per year. And usually the stock allocation in that portfolio is somewhere between 40 and 60%. And then bonds make up the rest of the portfolio.
Okay.
Why is this useful? Well, a lot of people don't understand how much money they need. And this is a very quick way to estimate how much money you need, right? So, like, you can roll this back and say, okay, well, if I have $1 million, that gives me $40,000 a year in spending. But I need $100,000 a year in spending. So that means I need $2.5 million in order to maintain the lifestyle that I want. In some cases, the principal goes down over those 30 years. It just depends on the sequence of returns, is what they call it. So, the worst thing that can happen to you is you retire in 2007, right? And then you effectively have like the lost decade. You have a big stock market crash and then really bad returns for stocks and bonds for like the next 10 years
Right.
because you're pulling out of your principal. It's not topping up every year. Whereas, the last 3 years, I think the S&P has done 20% plus per year. So if you retired 3 years ago and you're taking out 4%, but your portfolio is growing by, you know, call it 10% on the stock side and 4% or 2%, half of 4% on the bond side. So you're growing by 12%. You're actually netting out ahead of the game on that side of the like on your portfolio. So your portfolio has gone up even though you're withdrawing money from it.
Mhm.
So the sequence of return risk, what the 4% rule does is it helps you get comfortable with the idea that in market scenarios that are realistic that we've seen and everything like that, that you can take out this money and you'll be okay with a pretty high degree of certainty.
And this accounts for inflation as well. That was an
Yes.
interesting twist that I didn't fully understand. Like, well, what about inflation? Like, my X amount of money won't be the same in 20 years.
Yeah, it's inflation adjusted numbers. And then depending on your age, how long you plan to be retired for, you can adjust the 4%. You can go down to 3% if you're planning on retiring at 40 and you think you're going to live to be 100, right?
Mhm.
So that just makes you a little bit more conservative in what you're doing to help protect you against, future sequence of return risks. Or if you're older, you can say, hey, I'm already in my 60s. I plan on living into my 80s, so I need 20 years. So I can go a little bit higher. I can be a little bit more aggressive. Maybe I go 5%, and that gives me a better quality of life while I'm here. And I'm not as worried about, the last 10 years because I don't think I'll be around for it.
One way to think about the 4% rule, Dave, is that you're creating your own pension in a way. Because
Yeah.
one of the ways that if you're going to sit down and do the 4% rule calculation on your own finances, is that you'll notice that things like rental income or things like a pension or social security, any kind of annuity or annual payment or monthly payment that's coming into your household will greatly affect, provided it's reliable, will greatly affect, uh, what that total pension figure will be. Your personal pension, your personal liquid investments needs to be in order to get to the amount of money you need every year to live the lifestyle that you're looking at, that you desire.
What you're doing, what most Americans are doing now, is they're becoming their own pension fund. So you're saying, okay, I know that I need X amount of money to live the life I want to live. And this is where that money is going to come from. So some of the money can come from the stock market, some of the money can come from rental properties, some of the money can come from whatever other assets or work you want to do. So this is just saying for your stock and bond portfolio, this is a range that's safe for you to pull out depending on how long you're going to be retired and how long you plan on live after you're retired.
Just a thought that occurred to me. One of the interesting things about doing this type of planning is it's almost like when you have less wealth, it's sort of easier to spend money because it's like, I'm not wealthy anyway. And so I'll just get a car or I'll buy this thing. But as the numbers start to add up and you see the implications of them, it's like, well, I want to hold on to that number because, it's almost like your risk profile can go down in theory. And it just made me think, what do you think about buying a retirement business or getting involved in retirement businesses somehow as a way to invest money and generate income?
I'll play golf with my dad when I'm back in the US, right? And I've gotten an Uber from this little town in Connecticut where we have a place down to his place a number of times. 3 different times I got the same Uber driver. This guy was a retired entrepreneur whose wife told him he was not allowed to start another business. And he was effectively just bored out of his mind. So he started driving Uber. So each time, like, we started chatting about what was going on in his life and our businesses and all that kind of stuff. And you just sort of get the impression that people who are really entrepreneurial, they like starting things, they like getting their hands dirty, playing around with things. They're just going to continue to do that to a certain extent, but you don't want to have to rely on that if you can avoid
Right.
it. Like, if you can lock it in and say, hey, if I get carpal tunnel syndrome and I can't type, so I can't work on a computer, I'll still be okay. Like, I'll still be able to, live a nice rest of my life kind of thing. So I think about like the nest egg, the pile of money, whatever you want to call it, as just like locking in and securing that future for you.
Right. And because you can see it, now you're in a position to not risk it when you do indeed get into some kind of retirement business. You'll know exactly the amount that you can risk. And you're not like taking some kind of home run swing later in life or whatever. Cool. Point number 3, advanced personal finance, is when to concentrate and when to diversify. So this is interesting because I think the standard idea about investing is that it's about diversification. And so perhaps we're not entirely clear on what diversification means and when we should focus on concentration instead. I'm curious if you could share some thoughts around that.
Sure. So when I was working as a banker, my career had very high concentration risk. If my boss didn't like me or if his boss didn't like me, I could get fired and I'm out of work, right?
Right.
So one person could decide, all right, get rid of that guy, we'll get somebody new in. When I became an entrepreneur and we started growing the business, all of a sudden, we were getting paid by thousands of clients every year. And so that was much more diversified, right? If expats all decided to leave one country and move back to the US, we still had clients in other countries. And so our income was much more diversified than it ever was when we had big jobs at good companies and all that kind of thing. You hear a lot about people saying, well, I'm just going to reinvest everything back into my company. That can be a big risk also because the next level down is you can be overly concentrated in your company. You'll hear this in a lot of like financial media and stuff like that, where they say you shouldn't buy your own company's stock. And the reason they don't want you to do this is because if you end up losing the job, then the value of that stock goes into question, right? You don't have as much control. For entrepreneurs, it's very similar, where if you're putting all the money back into the business and then something changes, let's say there's a seismic change in the industry, AI comes along and eats your business or something like that, all of a sudden you lost all that money that you put back in there.
Yeah.
Whereas if you were spreading some of it outside of your business, you can invest in other businesses. You can invest in the stock market. You can buy rental properties, like whatever it is, you're still going to have other revenue streams. You're still going to have other areas that are probably doing well, even though that one's doing bad.
How would
Yeah.
you decide when to reinvest in a business? Because I think for most of us as bootstrappers, we like intuitively reinvest in the business for like the first year to two, right? To get it up to that level where it's spinning off cash. And then we don't really revisit that intuition and we kind of keep going. And so how do you think about like, okay, well, here's a time where I should be buying stock in other industries and or businesses?
Well, I would look at going back to how you opened it up, right? You go back to your monthly meeting, and if your biggest asset by far is your business, just do the thought experiment of what would happen to me if that went away, right?
Yeah.
And that's when you think, okay, now I need to diversify. Now I need to move some of this out of here and put it into something else or somewhere else so that if that goes to zero for some reason, then you have other assets you can rely on.
I think for reference, I do have my business on my balance sheet, but it's grayed out. So it's not actually like part of my net worth. It's a grayed out estimation of 90-day and 360-day value of the company. So like in other words, if I went through a traditional M&A process, I think that I could add this to my net worth balance sheet. If I fire sold it, if I was in an emergency and said, "Hey Dave, could you like buy my shares for me? Like here's probably what you would probably like easily give me this amount of money because you make it back or whatever." So I've got like these two numbers, but it's grayed out. And then we do the same process in the business where we're saying like, here's our valuation perspective. Here's how what we're, so it's kind of like off the personal balance sheet in an important way.
But you still have an idea what the value is, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're in a position where it's like a 10-to-1 ratio, like your business is worth 10 times what you as an individual are worth, then I would start diversifying some of that into yourself as opposed to keeping it all in the business. Now, obviously, yeah, if you have an AI company that's turning into a unicorn or something like that, yeah, you might want to let that run for a couple more months or a couple more years or something like that. Take the example of a founder whose business is going to be worth 9 figures. Even in that case, you're going to want to sell some of those shares, just take a little bit of that cash off table so that you're locking in your future. You're setting your minimum bar for what your lifestyle is going to be like going forward.
Yeah, and I think the classic story is where Zuckerberg turned down refrigerator money in order to take over the world with his business. And I think this is not a very instructional case study for the majority of bootstrappers. Like you want to get to refrigerator. Like that is the game plan. Global domination through social networks is not the game plan for the bootstrapper. The other important element to that founder, Zuckerberg in particular, is that the refrigerator number was never a question.
Right. He was well past it.
Well past it. So you have to consider the unique situations. And if you have, this is a important instruction from Jason Cohen's wonderful article about selling his first business. Your primary target is getting to the refrigerator number, and secondary target is meaningful work, which can be accomplished with no money. Meaningful work is a mindset. It is a level of energy and health and relationships. And so you don't need money to have meaningful work in your life. I think it's a fascinating concept if like that grayed out number, because there's plenty of founders who have, you're looking at your personal finances every month and it's like, well, my business is probably worth like $5 million if I did like a 360-day M&A process, but I've got like $40,000 in savings. And I don't think that that's a particularly rare situation in the entrepreneurial world. And I think that these sorts of processes can help you take a look at that and say, well, geez, is there a way that I could take some money off the table? Because we don't always get to land that $5 million plane, because that can often be, okay, well, now it's worth 1 million 2 years later.
Industries change all the time, right? Things get disrupted. Like we're seeing what I think we would all agree is going to be a massive wave of disruption coming at us right now.
Yeah.
So, that's something to think about. And, the final point I'll make here on the concentration versus diversification, like Most of us, what we're doing is we're concentrating on one business. We're pushing that really hard to try and grow our wealth. Because when you concentrate on something, like when you put all your eggs in one basket and you can steer that basket, you can make a lot of money, right? You can grow your wealth significantly. When you've started to grow the wealth, once you have like excess cash flow and things like that, you want to diversify it, not to make more money, but to make sure that you don't backslide and go back to being, like a bootstrapper, or go back to being poor, or, whatever term or phrase or whatever you want to use. So the concentration is really there to help you like accelerate the growth rate of your money. And then the diversification is like a parachute to slow you down if you start falling.
Makes sense. And we're going to talk about a example of a diversified portfolio here in just a minute. But I want to get to our fourth point, which is there is a type of portfolio called a drawdown portfolio. And I bring this up as advanced because it's something that I was not aware of. And I've noticed that the way, portfolios work in general is not something that the average entrepreneur thinks about too often. And so I'm curious if you could just give us like sort of the primer to what a drawdown portfolio is and how it might contrast with other types of portfolio constructions.
So the idea of any portfolio is to diversify your risk, right? Now, drawdown portfolios tend to spread things out quite a bit, meaning that you're not going to have like your standard 60/40 stock bond allocation in a drawdown portfolio. That's more of a growth portfolio. Probably a lot of people in the DC, a lot of people in the entrepreneur space have even riskier portfolios than that, meaning that a
Yes.
higher level of stocks, lower level of bonds. If you look at what's happened to assets in the last 2 years or so, things have been all over the place, right? Yeah, sometimes you have the stock market going up, sometimes you have the stock market dropping down. Gold has gone up by like 150% or so. Bonds have been fairly stable. So when you have a drawdown portfolio, this is where you're not adding to it anymore. You're selling assets every month, every 6 months, whatever it is, to live on. So you need to make sure that that money's there. So you want to spread your investments across a number of different asset classes so that you minimize the risk of all your assets going down at the same time.
And then you're drawing against a portfolio because there is the positive element of a high stock allocation is the variability. You want that because you want it to go variable uphill over time. But if you're getting closer to retirement age, you can reconstruct the portfolio so that it's safer to take out larger than maybe your 4% if you need it that year. Just as a sidebar advanced concept, have you ever heard of the Kelly criterion?
No, what's that one?
I'll just mention it to put it down in the show notes if people want to go to riskparityradio.com and even push it further about how are we sizing these bets based on the expected value. It's like one of those rules of thumbs that can be demonstrated through casino gambling. If you're playing roulette and you have $1,000 and you want to optimize for growing that, how would you place the bets? And so the difference with investing is that you don't know what the odds are. So you have to insert your predicted odds, and then the criterion can help you maximize your opportunity without risking your stack.
The other thing with some of these portfolios is there's books out there. I think it's like the Four Season portfolio or something like that.
Yep.
Where you have inflation, you have deflation, you have growth, and you have contraction. And so the idea for a lot of these more risk parity or drawdown style portfolios is that regardless of which season you're in, something in your portfolio will be doing well. So yeah, you're not going to beat a 90% stock, 10% bond portfolio in a good year for the NASDAQ, but you're going to beat it in a bad year for the NASDAQ. And so that's kind of the point when you're drawing down, is to beat it in the bad years, not necessarily the good years.
To combine two topics, and we're going to get to a advanced portfolio construction here in a minute. When it comes to investing in ETFs and stocks and stuff like that, how would you think about like when to concentrate versus diversify when it comes to your investments?
For Carrie and I, our investments, we try and keep it as diversified as we can. Now, that said, we have a little bit of like fun money on the side that
Like a barbell
purposefully,
strategy.
well, we purposefully concentrate that money. So, overall, everything's diversified, but for small buckets, you can really go concentrated to see what happens.
Fancy way of saying gambling. I like it. The final and fifth point. I'm curious if you could tell the story, of after you sold your business. You've got a cash pile, and what are some ways you thought about systematically building a portfolio with this wealth?
So I did a whole lot of research, read all the books, all this kind of stuff to try and come up with the optimal portfolio that, would carry us forward indefinitely. Carrie and I, in one of our money conversations, we said, why don't we hire a financial planner to review this and, just tell us where the portfolio allocation doesn't make sense, or we're taking too much risk here, not enough risk there, that kind of thing. So we found a planner that we liked. It was recommended by some people in the DC. We reached out, had a phone call with him, explained what we wanted. He said, okay, great. Let me look over everything you have. Send me all your numbers and I'll come back to you. So we send him everything. I send him, 3 different model portfolios that I bought, back tested, like all this kind of stuff. Right. And he gets us on the phone. He sits us down and he says, all right, you guys are young. You're smart. You've got a long life ahead of you and you just won the lottery. The only thing you have to worry about right now is not messing it up. Okay. And when you have somebody frame something like that, it's like, oh, yeah, like I don't have to chase super fast returns. I'm not trying to optimize, what the market is doing. I'm trying to get that parachute open and slow down the descent.
Yeah.
Like that's the goal. And so he gave us a portfolio that my initial reaction when I saw it, I was like, Jesus, we just paid a lot of money and this is what he's coming back with. And over the last couple of years, seeing it work, I'm pretty happy with it. It just kind of works. So the first piece of it is VTI, which is Vanguard's total stock market ETF, and that's 35% of the portfolio. The next piece is VXUS. That's Vanguard's total international stock market ETF, and that's 15%. So you've got half your money in equities. The next piece is BND, which is Vanguard's government bond ETF, and that's 25%. And then the last piece is TIPS, the Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. And you can do an ETF for that as well, and that's 25%. And the idea here is that the bonds stabilize the stock, the international stabilizes currency and domestic risk. The TIPS, the inflation protected, protects you if inflation starts shooting up again or anything like that. And it's just a very simple, balanced portfolio that anybody can manage with an hour every quarter kind of thing. Like it doesn't take a whole lot to manage it. Right now, we're like, it's too simple. I hate it.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm reflecting on because I wrote this down. I'm so thankful you're sharing it because it's such a cool thing to hear the actual. And it's striking in its simplicity. Like, okay, that's hitting the lottery. I thought it was supposed to be mansions and pool parties and Lamborghinis, and it's these simple allocations. But it kind of loops me back to why I'm against credit cards because I hear people talking about payoff rates and I hear them talking about logging into points interfaces. And look, if you're listening to this podcast, it's likely that your hourly billable rate is higher than any points interface that a credit card is going to give you. And in some ways, these things just take our eye off the ball. And I do think simplicity shines through in the majority of these cases. Do you think that there is a virtue in just keeping it simple?
100%, because as much as we all like to think that we're going to live forever and we're going to be running this portfolio forever, you're not. Eventually, somebody else is going to take this over for you. And if you have something that's so complicated that people can't get in there and understand what to do and when to do it and things like that, you run a big risk in having these assets disappear when your family needs them most. And when you keep things simple and easy, it gives you clarity in what's actually going on.
Yeah. Is there any other personal finance topics that you're passionate about that you want to touch on as we wrap up the episode here?
There's a lot of other things that people can think about or should think about as they're doing this and growing this. Like, obviously, things like insurance are uber helpful for people. If you're an entrepreneur with a business partner, then you should really have like a buy-sell insurance policy in place. Anybody with kids or people they love should have life insurance. Everybody should have an estate plan. Unless you really trust the government to take care of your family and your children and your money, you should have an estate plan.
These are not hard things to accomplish, by the way. This could be on month 3 of your personal financial meeting. This could be on the to-do list.
Yeah, 100%. Like, this is very much within reach for 95% of people out there.
Yeah.
We'll call this the 201 episode, right? We had a 101. This will be 201. At some point, we'll do 301. And then we can get into ideas like money location, like what you put in tax-free accounts versus taxable accounts, things like that, or tax deferred.
Yep.
That's important. Ideas around giving money away, things like donor advised funds, stuff like that. There's a whole world out there around all this stuff. But yeah, I think it's just important for people to own it and say, hey, this is something that I'm going to be dealing with the rest of my life. So let me get into it and have some fun with it.
Yep. Amazing. You guys send me your emails if you got questions for the 301, the 401 episode. We'd love to hear your questions and formulate some interesting responses to them. Dave, I want to thank you for your time and insight on these topics. It's been really cool learning from you today. So thanks for joining us on the Tropical MBA podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'm on our sponsor's website right now. You got to check it out. It's absolutely beautiful. bentonow.com/TMBA. It's email marketing built for and by bootstrap founders. Bento is a powerful email marketing and automation platform built for fast-growing, location-independent entrepreneurs. Whether you're emailing a few thousand people a week or a million, Bento's got you covered. Their AI features are insane. You can just describe the workflow you want, and Bento will build it for you. What's better is they have an offer just for TMBA listeners. You can choose to either get $300 in credits immediately after your free trial to check out all the features, or they will price match your current email marketing provider aggressively. You choose. So thank you to Bento for sponsoring the podcast, and go check out how Bento can not only save you money, but improve your email marketing starting today. You can find out more at bentonow.com/TMBA.